Coming up now, we have our Policy and Activism panel. And as I mentioned before the break, if you were here yesterday, we had a couple of talks that talked about a lot of very heavy and scary things that are going along in the political sphere right now. So it is a brilliant time to have a panel that can help us find ways to take action and move forward in a way that is productive and maybe makes everything a little bit less scary. All right. For this important panel discussion, we've asked our friend and past FREEFLO presenter, Gina Duncan, to moderate. Gina Duncan is a national and international advocate, corporate trainer, and speaker specializing in transgender dynamics in the workplace, classroom, and in society. She's conducted transgender cultural competency workshops for all segments of society and worked with innumerable organizations to improve awareness, knowledge, and understanding of the transgender and gender non-binary community. She is currently the president and CEO of the Pride Chamber of Greater Orlando. She has an incredible body of work and experience, and we are very fortunate to have her as our panel moderator for today's talk. Joining Gina today are two Florida leaders who are deeply involved in the fight for social justice, as well as two leaders from national organizations that focus on equality for secular values. And now I'm going to pass it over to Gina to introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Let me start off by introducing our amazing panel. My former boss of 10 years, Nadine Smith. You know Nadine Smith, I'm sure. Executive Director of the state's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization, Equality Florida. Founder as well. Dedicated to ending discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. In 2022, she was named to the Times 100 Most Influential People in the World. Big hand for Nadine Smith. Sam McGuire, to my left, from American Atheists, Director of Grassroots Organizing. Sam McGuire has a varied background in counseling, education, event planning, and volunteer management. As the American Atheists Director of Grassroots Organizing, she works with local grassroots advocates, volunteers, affiliates, to help them engage on emerging local civil rights issues, advocate for state-level legislation, and build thriving communities. Sam McGuire. Far right, Cheyenne Drews, who is the Progress Florida Deputy Communications Director. Cheyenne was born and raised in Florida. Pronouns she, her, hers. She has a long track record of leadership on policy, communications, campaigns, and constituent services. A graduate of the University of Central Florida. Go Knights. Yep. She was the operations supervisor for the Mother's Milk Bank of Florida before becoming a public policy consultant for Planned Parenthood. In 2020, she managed Representative Ana V. Escamani's re-election campaign. I heard a rumor she might be running for mayor or something like that. Ooh, that's a good rumor. With her Florida House campaign and served as her chief of staff in the legislature. She currently is the Deputy Communications Director of Progress Florida, Cheyenne Drews. And last but not least, to my right, Fish Stark, American Humanists Association Executive Director. Fish Stark is an organizer, educator, social entrepreneur, a lifelong humanist. Fish has spent his career turning big ideas into bold action in service of belonging, flourishing, and social justice for all people. Prior to joining the AHA as executive director, Fish was the head of Program Plus Curriculum at Legends, an educational technological startup where he led research and implementation teams to create products that help children build self-confidence, positive mental health, and critical thinking skills. Fish Stark. So with this amazing panel, our goal is to really get into, I think, what everyone's been thinking and feeling and wanting to talk about right now, right? There's so much to say. Every day is another chaos, is another breaking news on all the channels and things like that. And I think if you're like me, there's a lot of feelings of confusion and sadness in reference to how do we react, how do we push back, how do we ensure that our voices are being heard. So that's what we want to talk about, and then certainly leave enough time for questions. So I thought what we would do is start at a local level. Let's start at the state of Florida, if we will, because as you know, Florida's been kind of the incubator for a great deal of the things that we're seeing at the public policy level, at the national and federal level, obviously. Over the last 5 years, we have been pushing back against the DeSantis hate slate and the culture wars that have been coming from the Heritage Foundation, and we have seen that incubator has now turned into a national movement. So let's start with that. So Nadine, I know that Equality Florida has been on the front line and pushing back against these things. If we could talk about what's the evolution of this? How did it start? It was seated in conservative extremism, something that we as an organization certainly want to push back against. But in that framework, how did it start? Where are we now? What does it look like moving forward?
Well, history repeats itself, and we should remember that, because there are lessons in history that tell us why we are here right now. There's a New York Times article. You can find it. I'm quoted in it. But the thing I want to draw your attention to is not my brilliant quote that occurs later, but it's in the very first paragraph of the article. And the American Principles Project says, gay marriage was no longer an effective wedge issue, so we had to find something else. And we threw everything against the wall, and to our surprise, what stuck is people did not know the transgender community, and we knew we could work with that. Basically, they understood that they could take ignorance, and instead of turning it towards curiosity, they could weaponize it. And so scapegoating is an essential part of authoritarian takeovers. And they seek to begin with the smallest, most marginalized, least understood, because they can project all of their fears. They can stoke fear. And so they very quickly move from a place where maybe a lot of people are like, I'm not trans, I don't have a trans kid, maybe this isn't I don't like it, but it's not my number one issue. But this is how it always happens. And by the time, I'm not going to quote Niemöller here, but we all know that by the time they arrive at you, they've already sharpened their swords on all the people that you weren't. And so we are experiencing the replaying, I imagine there are folks here old enough to remember Anita Bryant, when she went from selling us orange juice to calling us groomers, launching her Save the Children campaign. There's nothing in the current playbook that wasn't part of that playbook. And so I think the important lesson that everybody has to take right now is you link arms in dangerous times. You show up for the first fight. You don't let them build momentum. You stand on these values right out of the gate. Again, we're seeing with the deportation of a campus organizer, they've chosen somebody who incites a great deal of passion in different directions. And there's some people who are First Amendment, defenders who may feel conflicted, so maybe you don't show up for that fight. But once you allow that precedent to be formed, once you allow due process to be thrown out the window, you've opened the floodgates in the same way that they said, oh, we're just concerned about, K through 3. And some of these books aren't appropriate for K through 3. Before session was over, it was K through 8. By next session, it was K through 12 and the universities. They went from removing And Tango Makes 3 to removing The Life and Times of Rosa Parks. So I just want to remind us that we have seen this playbook before. All authoritarians use it. And the most important piece to remember is in the history of this country, we have found ways to push back. And in fact, we've found ways to use the attack as a springboard, not just to stop the backlash, but to actually spring forward. There's there are parallels to the oligarchs who paved the way for the New Deal. So I'm going to stop there, but we've been here before. History has lots of warnings for us, but it also has lots of lessons on how we get through it.
Thank you, Nadine. It's been written that our two political parties are increasingly animated by two starkly conflicted moral visions that have struggled for ascendancy since the first Europeans landed on our shores. Is America a divinely ordained promised land for European Christians, or is America a pluralistic democracy where all stand on equal footing as citizens? It can be argued currently that Americans are divided, with roughly half embracing the latter vision, and the other half a defensive, mostly white Christian coalition that continues to cling to the former. Comments on that?
Oh, the old America is a Christian nation question. We know it's horseshit. I mean, all we have to do is go back to not even Jefferson, not even Paine, right? Not even the clear deists among the founders. We can go back to Washington, who was a devout Christian, but was really clear in all of his writings that the U.S. was supposed to be, that our primary constitutional innovation, as Jamie Raskin says, was the separation of church and state. If anyone in here has not read Washington's Newport letter, I encourage you to read it. Second year of his presidency, he wrote a letter to a Jewish congregation in Rhode Island that had written him and asked him, in a sense, about whether they would be protected in the United States, because, of course, at that time, we really were a nation of religious refugees, whether it's the Catholics in Maryland, where I come from, or the Quakers in Pennsylvania, or the Puritans in Massachusetts. We were basically a nation of heretics. And Washington very powerfully said in that letter, it is no more that toleration is spoken of as if it were by the indulgence of one class of people that another should gain his natural rights. But in reality, the United States of America requires nothing more of those under its protection than that they live as good citizens. That they live as good citizens. And then he quoted the Bible to say, everyone shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. He was talking about Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and the people that we have in power right now who are trying to push oppressive Christian patriarchy upon all of us. And, we see they've brought a number of people into their vision because they're telling them religion is on the decline and we have to protect it. But really, they're talking about something different. They love to point to, and Trump referenced this in his National Prayer Breakfast speech, they love to point to data that says religious people are happier than secular people. And that's true, but only when you control for religious attendance. Because it's community, not faith, that makes people happy. And it's also only true when you control for identity. People with a strong secular identity, people who strongly believe they're humanist or atheists, are, again, happier than weakly religious people. So really, what they're trying to sell is a feeling of community and a feeling of togetherness that the right wing has stolen from us by making us work longer hours for worse wages, by decimating the investments in the institutions like schools and libraries and the arts that bring us all together, by letting tech companies, without any kind of regulation, divide our attention and divide our communities. Ultimately, they are trying to sell a false solution to the problems they created, which is something the founders never intended. And we've all got to feel as empowered as we can to push back against that before they fool anyone else. That's all I got to say.
Well said. And along those lines, yeah. Cheyenne, along those lines, we've seen in the state of Florida that a lot of this extremism is wrapped in a careful bow of parental rights and things like that are impacting our young people in schools. And I know you've been working in that area.
Absolutely, and to the former point, I mean, it is beneficial for the people in power to think that we are extremely polarized, right? Because their belonging relies on a sense of unbelonging for other people. And parental rights are a really interesting case study because it speaks a lot to what Nadine started us with, of this incremental attack.
which is indicative that they know what they're doing is unpopular, or else they would go for the full thing, right? And so I'd argue that in Florida, we actually have more public opinion on our side than we think. And research and polling actually shows that we often overestimate communities' intolerance to our issues than actually exists, right? And so that speaks to who has the mic of who we, what the influence actually is. And so with parental rights, we know that it was never, as Nadine said, about kindergarten or schools, in the same way it was never about bathrooms, right? And so in Florida, right now, we are actually facing one of the most dangerous bills that we're looking at this legislative session, sponsored by Senator Aaron Grahl, the consistent sponsor of abortion bans in Florida, seeks to remove a minor's ability to access any type of reproductive health care without a parent's permission. And we know that the majority of young people involve parents or guardians in their decisions around pregnancy or family planning or sexual health, and those who don't have a damn good reason not to. And this bill seeks to remove their ability to access birth control, STI testing. In Florida, you currently need to not only notify, but also get the consent of a parent or guardian to access an abortion if you're under 18, or else you have to go through this really arduous judicial bypass process where it's essentially a young person's asked really invasive questions about if they're mature enough to access an abortion, all within 6 weeks of being pregnant. This bill would remove that ability as well. Additionally, it would remove a young person's ability to fill out a questionnaire without their parents' permission. These are questionnaires that are screening for things like abuse at home. And so it gets to the core of the notion that we know that we cannot legislate good parenting. We cannot legislate healthy relationships. And so bills that are operating under these types of policies, it's clear that it's meant to be incremental to get to that full swath of reproductive health care. As a policy nerd, I want to name the bill that I just mentioned. It's Senate Bill 1288 that we absolutely want to oppose. And I should also mention that 49 states currently allow young people to access STI testing without parental consent. And so, again, we know that it's unpopular. They're doing this for a reason. It's also, we have to look at who's backing them, right? Because when we look at who opposes this type of legislation, we've got the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Public Health Association, all oppose these mandatory parental involvement bills. And of course, what they're gonna cite is not founded in medicine or science, because that's not what this bill is about, right? It's about control. And so seeing past that is really important. And as a comms person, one of the best ways we can do that is lead with values, is center values and impact, rather than getting into the weeds of some of the logistics. So if you're like, how do I go out and talk about this legislation? Center values, center dignity, center empowerment of young people knowing what's best for them the same way that each of us know what's best for us. And also, I meant to start with an apology that I'm losing my voice. Yelling into the void really takes its tolls. But hopefully it stays for y'all.
Thank you so much. So the question is secular pluralism an effective counter for conservative extremism? It's often said right now that the Dems are kind of in a place of, disarray. We're voting on different things in reference to extending the budget, things like that. Is there a game plan? Is there an effective way to push back against the religious right?
Yeah, so when we were talking about getting ready for this panel, I said for this audience, we need to, in particular, underline the fact that we need to speak to our values, and we also need to work with all of our partners. So you'll notice on this stage, there's a wide variety of different folks who are all working together on progressive issues in the state of Florida, and of course, with my friend Fish here, we're working on this in all 50 states. So we really need to come together with our partners and make sure that we are working together in coalition with folks that are non-religious, that are religious, that are different than us, that are the wide breadth of diversity that Forrest was talking about on stage earlier. And we need to make sure that we are forging these bonds in ways that, to Nadine's point, we are all linking arms together in the first fight, right? We need to be standing up now, and I know that we've been working in the state of Florida on that for years. Devin's in the back, and she's one of our awesome volunteers in Tallahassee who has been working with these folks for years on these issues. And I think that now we really need everybody just to get in the fight. As Devin said from our stage at our convention, step the fuck up. It's time. You need to be out there, and you need to be loud and vocal, and you need to be partnering with our partners and our coalition folks who have the same values as us, and be loud about it.
I think that part of the reason that we're here is because we have yet to confront the myths of America, and there has been this process of deconstruction, whether it's deconstructing people's Mormonism, their religion, and you mentioned the void, right? And I do think that there's a lot of people who slowly deconstruct their religion. That's how I came to my atheism. I was in church all the time. Not because my parents forced us, me and my brother. I often say there's nothing like reading the Bible to make you go, wait, what? Right? But to Fish's point, what it offers is community. And the challenge is something that is rooted primarily in rational thought that doesn't nourish the desire for community. It means that there's not the stickiness that keeps us together. Playing roulette with your everlasting soul is a thing that will motivate people to put on the jacket of that faith, even if they're not faithful to it. And so I think that there are corollaries here. After George Floyd and as the Black Lives Movement began to rip away the mythologies and make people stare directly at what was happening routinely in America, we saw a lot of performative actions by people, by organizations, by corporations. But when it came to actually the sustained work of permanently deconstructing those myths and building something new, we are seeing the backlash to all of that. We are seeing corporate America completely dismantling their DEI. And I think we see this in people. I remember reading Billy Graham, his biography, his autobiography, and he talked about coming to a sort of a crisis of belief. And he went to a mountaintop. I might be not getting this perfectly right. But he basically said, when I come down from here, I'm either going to walk away from this faith or I'm never going to question it again. And having spoken to Rich Logis, who started Leaving MAGA, which is well worth looking up, because what you come to understand is this is all cult psychology. That sense of belonging, being love-bombed, feeling as though you are unique and uniquely part of something. The purpose of going door to door and being treated badly is not to actually convert people, but to reinforce the sense that you are one of the few and the special. And so these are the dynamics that they are playing with. We on the rational side, we don't tell you that if you don't come to the next meeting, you are in danger, right? We don't have the same points of leverage, but what we do have, and Fish, I think it's worth underscoring over and over again, is we have to have community. We have to have mutual aid. We have to have a sense that we look out for each other. We have to have this idea. We're up against people who fear if they walk away that they will lose everything. Their family lore, their community, their friendships. I'm talking both about MAGA and faith. And so I think that I was glad to hear people speaking about love and speaking about the ties that bind, rather than simply a intellectual deconstruction of religion, because it doesn't nourish something really important in us. So that's, to me, the greatest challenge, that they are supplying with the threat of eternal horror, a kind of community and a bond that is not fraudulent. And what is our corollary? And I think there's, at Equality Florida, the corollary is we are a community under siege, and we're connected by the sense that we are under siege. We have an understanding that we have to look out for each other and show up for each other and be physically in space together. And so I'm thrilled to be here to see everybody in this place. And I would say, how do we create more and more places that aren't faith-driven, where people can get together around these core values, have that sense of community, not to exclude, but to say you can have all of those things you crave without scapegoating, without fear, without giving yourself over to irrationality.
Just to add to what Nadine is saying, I'm begging everyone, not just everyone in this room, I'm begging everyone at the DNC to understand people don't make political decisions based on rationality. They make them based on what politics can offer to them to heal the things that they worry about. They're making it from a place of aspiration or desperation. And the question was, is secular pluralism a good antidote, an effective antidote to Christian nationalism? No, not right now. Who the hell's in the White House? We can't look at that and say, yeah, we're winning, we won, without being willing to say, okay, here are the changes we need to make in order to win. Because it's not that Americans don't like secular pluralism. When you ask people if they believe in the separation of church and state, that's got a polling floor of 80%, and it has for decades. And when you ask people if they believe religion should be a personal choice, that is broadly supported. 5% of Americans supported Project 2025. If you just give people the choice between secular pluralism and Christian nationalism, they're going to choose our side, but that's not enough. Because, again, people are looking for something to belong to, and we have got to get as good as they are at welcoming people in and making them feel like they have a community around them. And I want to point out, CFFC, I think, does this better than anyone in the country. Anyone in the country. We hired someone just last week whose job it is to train all the AHA chapters across the country how to be more like CFC. I'm just going to tell you that. And we have to also speak more and more clearly to people's economic pain. Because the root cause of the fact that people are making these decisions is the fact that 50% of people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck, and 50% of people in this country are struggling with anxiety and depression in some way. People are stretched. They know they're getting screwed. You'll notice at the AHA, we're talking a lot more about economic justice, and our founding belief, as it's stated in the 1933 Humanist Manifesto, humanists demand a shared life and a shared world. It's not that other issues don't matter. It's not that pluralism doesn't matter. But people need, if secular pluralism is going to succeed as a movement that unites people, it's going to have to answer people's question of, why do I have to work 2 jobs to make rent? Because ultimately, that was the tension that the religious right exploited in order to win power this last election. They had an answer that carried better than we did. It was full of lies, but it carried better. We've got to make sure that we're speaking up about that just as much and more as we're talking about the Constitution.
And I'll just add two points as well. I think we're all on the same page. We're thinking about the social conditions that made it possible for where we're at politically, right? For these bigger systems to exist. And Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, he speaks a lot to this about how in 50s and 60s we're peaking in terms of our harmony, our ability to support one another. And now we're seeing the sharpest decline in that. Folks are gathering, as everyone on the stage has said, in fewer and fewer ways. There are fewer neighborhood cookouts and bowling leagues and knitting groups, but the places that people are still gathering are places of worship and online. And I'd be remiss if I left out the latter, because not only are they gathering more and more online, that's obviously becoming more and more tailored to exactly what the folks up here have mentioned. And in that, I think about the fact that who is this benefiting, right? Who's benefiting from suffering? Because someone is, they're perpetrating it. And when we look at enemies, one that a lot of people are comfortable talking, or are comfortable accepting, are corporate powers, right? And so if it's okay, I want to name some names.
Go on.
Thank you. So, this is probably an era that we'd very much define by culture wars that have very real impacts on our lives, but they also exist to amplify a base and to benefit the corporate elite. So I want to get specific about this because last year here in Florida, our governor offers a very good example. He started the Florida Freedom Fund, I know, to oppose Amendments 3 and 4 last year to legalize recreational marijuana and to end Florida's near total abortion ban, respectively. And some of the top donors to this political committee include some names you might recognize: Comcast, Visa, Spectrum, AT&T, and Duke. And when we look at some of the most anti-abortion politicians, anti-LGBTQ politicians, they're funded by some of the following: FPL and other utility companies, US Sugar, Geo Group, private prisons, Florida Hospital Association, NBC Universal, Florida Blue, Publix, and Disney. And now I'm not suggesting that all of those organizations necessarily are against the issues that we care about, but they're comfortable trading campaign dollars for political favors. And so when we look at the powers that be, we can't forget how they're getting resourced, which is why I bring this point, because the class dynamic of all of this, we can't ignore, right? We can't ignore the fact that this pitting also comes down, as Fish mentioned, to economic stability. But when we can identify these enemies that don't threaten our sense of belonging, I think we can make a lot more progress.
Thank you for that. Well said. Anything to add? We would be remiss if we didn't talk about our schools. We found that the rhetoric in Tallahassee emanated there, and then the legislators went back to their respective districts, got with their school boards, and rained hate and discrimination down on young people in our schools. And we've seen, which has been very just heartwarming to me, young people really standing up and pushing back against this. But what can we do to support our young people against transphobia, against the total lack of tolerance in reference to diversity in our schools, from banning books to not being able to say gay, you can't put a gay flag in the schools, to now we're seeing, the 10 commandments being put in schools and things like that. So let's talk about our schools. You want to start down here?
Please, I just went.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, so we're seeing this fight across the country. Generally, the really bad laws get floated in Texas or Florida or both, and then we see them spread. So a good example of that is the school chaplain bill that we obviously opposed in Florida and in Texas. Got introduced in Texas first, then in Florida, and now we have seen it. I think we're at 25 or 26 states it got introduced this year. And this is what they do. This is their playbook, right? They'll put it in a couple states where they think it'll fly. They'll see what the opposition is so that they can craft their messaging. And then they'll put it in another state or two and test it again and see what happens. And in our case, with the school chaplain bill, in Texas and in Florida, we had a really awesome campaign of interfaith work with the Interfaith Alliance and our partners at Americans United and other folks, FFRF, AHA, formed a coalition. And in Texas, we targeted the top 25 districts in terms of population. And we put together this coalition, 2 different letters. One letter was from the national organizations and the organizations, the secular ones, and people of faith, right? And then they put together a letter from clergy, from all types of clergy, opposing it because most people don't want unqualified school chaplains talking to their kids. And that's people of faith and of no faith. Don't want that. Understand that we should be backing school counselors who have degrees and skills and are professionals to talk to our kids. And so in Texas, the top 25 districts did not adopt a school chaplain policy. And so we took that lesson and we brought it to Florida, and we did the same thing. And big shout out to David Williamson and others probably in this room who attended school board meetings and went to the school boards and said, nobody wants this. And again, presented this same letter from the national organizations. And by then, I think we had 500 clergy on the letter that we were circulating in Florida. And we took that lesson and we brought it here, and now we're using the same sort of strategy for the 10 Commandment bills, for the In God We Trust bills, for the all of the bad bills in Florida that we're seeing in schools. And so again, that working together and really engaging in ways that we really haven't thought about at American Atheists previously, right? Because we need to be working together on these things, because it's also a fire hose of shit, y'all. Like I think we're tracking 550 bills now across the 50 states, and we're not done, right? It's only March, so we have months to go of tracking bills, and so. It's just very important to try to get ahead of it and try to use their own strategies against them, not let them weaponize religion and faith and no faith. And so just building those coalitions and working together, I think, is just key on working on all of these issues. And we're seeing, we already spoke about parents' rights bills, but holy cow, the parents' rights bills across the country, trying to erase DEI, trying to erase LGBTQ folks, trying to police what people can say and what they can do and what teachers can say and what they can do. It's just absolutely devastating to somebody like me. I have a degree in school counseling, and so watching that happen in state after state after state, and I'm sorry, Florida, but y'all are usually one of the test grounds, so we see it here first, and whatever happens here gets spread. So stop it here.
Fish, you got something on this?
Every kid deserves to be themselves. Every kid deserves to be themselves. And that's what I tend to lead with when talking about these issues, because not every voter has the experience of being transgender, but everyone's got the experience of being a kid and feeling like you weren't allowed or weren't able to be yourself. One of the things that we're training our staff on at AHA is something called the race class narrative. It's a concept for how to talk about these divisive issues, popularized by Anat Shankar-Osario. He's one of the best communicators we have in the left space, someone whose work we all should read. And the thesis of the race class narrative is that billionaires and people in power are trying to divide us. And what we need to do is call out their hypocrisy and emphasize shared values. And a value we all share is that every kid deserves to be able to be themselves, and every kid should feel safe, and every kid should be treated fairly, no matter who they are. And the truth is that billionaires and the radical Christian right are trying to pit us against each other, undermine this shared value. Why? For fun? No. Because they don't really want to fix our schools. They don't want to fix our schools because fixing our schools would require fixing child poverty, which would require Tesla to pay more than 1% of its profits in taxes. Right? They don't want to fix public schools because they want to undermine confidence in the public schools so that our tax dollars can be sent to their unaccountable, discriminatory religious private schools. And they don't want to fix public schools because the voucher dollars that you guys are paying with for your tax dollars in Florida are going to buy apps that are owned by the billionaires that are funding the laws that are passing the voucher program. This is why, I quit the tech industry 6 months ago to run the AHA. I took a financial pay cut and a moral pay raise, and it was because I worked in tech and I saw that the people behind this school choice rhetoric are the billionaires who are directly profiting off the vouchers that you all are paying for with their ownership of these companies that can take this voucher money. It is a con and a fraud, and they are using social issues to try and distract us from the things we need to do, which are pay our teachers fairly, provide free school lunches so kids so that kids can actually be learning, because you can't be learning when your basic needs of security and nutrition are not met. This is the conversation we need to be having, and I'll tell you how I know it works. I've never really, a lot of you know, I grew up in a political family, and there's part of me that's never really left the family business. And the last election, I was running campaigns against Moms for Liberty candidates in Maryland. Yes, we have them in Maryland too. If you want belief that something can change in 10 years, in a district where 10 years ago the voters in that district elected a white Christian nationalist who believed Dixie should be the national anthem to represent them on the county commission, This past election, those voters re-elected a queer Jewish woman who was standing firmly on trans rights to a school board seat by 22 points. Because when we were going door to door and when we were talking about the trans issues that our opponent was hitting us with in the mail, what we said was, all kids deserve to be who they are. All kids deserve to feel safe. And this is a distraction from the fact that our opponent does not want to raise wages for teachers, does not want more mental health counselors in your schools, does not want more money for career and technical education, wants that money to go to religious private schools instead. And that's what wins, because ultimately we all are united by good schools, regardless of how much cultural education we might have about transgender issues. And the final thing I'll say is that they have overplayed their frickin' hand. We can use what's going on in Louisiana and Oklahoma against them, because guess what? If you are pushing Christian religious texts on children in public school, you do not care about parents' rights to dictate their moral education. You care about pushing right-wing Christianity on kids and calling it freedom, and that's what we need to tell them every step of the way.
Right on. I know Equality Florida has had for a long time a Safe and Healthy Schools program, which has been in the trenches. Nadine, tell us more about that, if you would.
Yeah, and one of the sayings we have at Equality Florida is, don't get distracted by the individual fires, focus on the arsonist. Be clear about why they are doing what they do. Understand why these things are connected. Again, history instructs us. When Anita Bryant went from selling orange juice, right, to saying these despicable things about our community, she was bankrolled by the moral majority. And why they didn't care about abortion then, the thing that animated them was they hated Supreme Court rulings that would require them to integrate their schools. And so they saw her as a vehicle to destabilize the moral authority of those rulings and to claw back their right to a white supremacist ideology. We saw it remember the stealth candidates who would run for school board? They'd hide all of their affiliations. Again, history instructs us. And so, Moms for Liberty is a perfect example. This was not a group of, concerned moms who, stepped away from baking pies to expose pornography in the library, and they're, as they clutch their... This is a political operation cooked up by Christian Ziegler, the now disgraced, former head of the Republican Party, and his wife, Bridget Ziegler. And Christian Ziegler would tell anyone who would listen that Republicans were hemorrhaging suburban moms, which you should read as white moms, after George Floyd, and that we needed something that would scare them back into the arms of the Republicans. So this is why we have all of this over-the-top rhetoric. Again, history tells us that the fact that Trump says, your kid can go to school as John and come back 2 days later as Jane, you go, now our impulse is to break down logically why that's absurd. 2 days? Anyway, but that's our impulse. But the reality is, the reason for the big lie is not to make you believe the big lie. The reason for the big lie is always to make everything plausible and nothing reliable. Like, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. It didn't matter whether you actually thought that, because what it was intended to evoke in you is, they're not like us. There's something unusual. There's something alien, and I don't like it. And so I'm not saying I love what's happening, but I'm not going to give them any energy. I'm not going to help. And so right now, I would say that politicians on the progressive side of things have taken half of Fish's lesson. I remember during the gay marriage fights, the marriage equality fights, that Jesse Jackson would go into black churches, and I remember being in one in Tampa, and he said, raise your hand if you're getting gay married this weekend. Anybody? And the room would sort of look around and sort of laugh a little bit, and then he said, how many have been invited to a gay wedding? Anyone? And now people are just sort of chuckling. He goes, how did this become the number one thing on our agenda? Rhetorically, you can kind of go, yeah, that makes sense. He's pivoting them away. He's showing them the manipulation. But unless you begin with this statement, every person deserves to be able to take care of their loved ones and access the same legal protections that I have. Let me be very clear. And now let's talk about how they have taken whatever uncertainty you might have, or maybe it's a question you've never really posed to yourself, and turned it into a weapon that has you, they hope, working against your own interests, right? And then if you say, how many people are going to, it's like, don't talk about the fact that Trump has more felonies than the NCAA has transgender athletes until you've established very clearly that transgender people have a right to exist, live full lives, and whatever process of determining fairness in sports, whether it's weight categories in boxing or the height of the rim, should be determined by that sports association, the athletes, and the science that they rely on, not the governor, not the legislature. Then you can move to the next one.
A little moderator privilege. I would be remiss if I didn't address the transgender issue as a transgender advocate. I remember when the transgender issue started rearing its ugly head in Florida back in 2012. I had the good fortune of being working with Equality Florida, and we rallied our folks together and we talked to the community, and we came to Tallahassee with a dozen three-piece suited, well-groomed, bearded, transgender men. And we walked them to the podium when they were trying to pass the first transgender bathroom ban. And one after one, those young men stood to the microphone and said that if you pass this bill that says you can only use the bathroom that aligns with what? Your assigned sex at birth. I will be in the bathroom with your wife, these men would say. 200 pounds, beards, three-piece suits, buffed. We saw legislators running for the doors. They had always thought in the paradigm, of transgender women. And the sad thing about that is, even back then in 2012, before the transgender issue became so prevalent, is that it was a non-existent problem in search of a flawed solution. I did a study when we were prepping to testify in Tallahassee to find how many transgender people had been arrested in a bathroom anywhere in the state of Florida over the last 20 years. None. How many pedophile guys who were in the bathroom molesting young girls? Tons. So again, it was a situation that did nothing but what? Throw red meat to a base. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Men don't need to be in the bathrooms. We see that, happening in Washington every day with certain legislators that can't get transgender people out of their minds. We have a president who can't get transgender people off their lips. So we fight this today in the same vein that this is, again, throwing red meat to a base based on an issue that doesn't exist. The transgender athlete ban, if you will, kind of brought this to the forefront. And to a lot of people, that made a lot of sense, right? Oh, yeah, men shouldn't be competing with women and things like that. The International Olympic Committee, the NCAA, the Florida High School Athletic Association put in policies to provide a level playing field. You had to be on testosterone or estrogen for a certain period of time so that there would not be an unfair advantage on the playing field. Wasn't enough. And then more and more, as the extreme right kept elevating the transgender issue, the more they put false narratives around that. And sadly, there were isolated incidents where there were swimmers that looked, more physically able than women and things like that. But the transgender issue is truly something that I encourage everyone to understand. Number one, understand the facts, that the facts that they provide the public are lies, And then secondly, understand that transgender people, while we are I think they said the NCAAs in recent testimony to Congress said that there's less than 10 NCAA trans athletes that they know of right now in the whole country. So is this an issue? And then secondly, bathrooms and other things. They're trying more and more, transgender military are no longer allowed in the military, things like that. Ban on transgender people using the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity, right? My daughter's gay and presents very masculine, and she's okay that I say this, but she's been thrown out of more bathrooms than I have. How do you enforce transgender bathrooms? You have a bathroom monitor standing there? I remember going to the movies one time, and there was a rather military-looking retired guy standing at the door monitoring the bathroom for his wife. And he clocked me as I went in the door, and he let me pass, but I knew that he was being the vigilante bathroom monitor. Because we find bathroom bills are what? They're unenforceable. Unless you have a bathroom monitor who's like, ID, or I'm gonna, measure how feminine or masculine you are to use certain restrooms and things like that. So pushing back against the transgender narrative does two things. Number one, it puts the truth out to the general public and dispels these myths that are truly myths. And then secondly, gives hope to a community that right now, I have so many friends who are saying that they're afraid to go to the grocery store. They don't want to go to Walgreens because they're just afraid of the hate that's out there. So it needs to be said that whatever we all can do together to dispel the lies that are being perpetuated out there and to prop up our transgender folks, as well as, our rapidly growing gender non-conforming or queer young people who are coming out, the time is really here for us to do that. So with that, let me kind of just comments from the crowd. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. This needs to be a non-negotiable. I work in largely reproductive health and freedom, and those spaces must, as a non-negotiable, be hand in hand with fighting for trans access to healthcare, because at the end of the day, it still comes down to the same value, right? That we are all in the best position to make the decisions for ourselves, for our family, for our health, for our safety. And people can get behind that, right? They care about privacy, they care about dignity, they care about freedom. And so if it's not already a non-negotiable for you, I implore you for this to be the year to do so. And if it's okay, I'd love to just give some flowers to Equality Florida. We were asked about young people. Please, yes. In my younger life, I was an intern with Equality Florida back in the day, and their organizing model is one that can absolutely be replicated. I want to talk specifics because it's so important that we have these conversations, but if they stay in these rooms and we're the same people that keep showing up in those rooms, our impact is limited by that size, right? So Equality Florida, they're in the Capitol every single day of legislative session this year, and every year, frankly. And in the ways that they bring people to Tallahassee, they do a number of things. One, they help get them there. Transportation, food, housing, things like that. They train them. They talk about the process. They explain that oftentimes by the time you're hearing about a bill on the news, it's too late. So here's how to show up in committee weeks. Here's how to be early. Here's how to be effective. But they also hold space for the deeply personal parts of this work. So oftentimes before folks are testifying in front of lawmakers who it will be a miracle if they look up from their desk at them, they offer space in the form of a rally or a town hall, so that people can share their lived experiences and be held in that as whole people, not just for their stories when it's convenient, but their lives every day. They hold that space before they're asked to share that thing that maybe is most vulnerable and most beautiful about them. And that also helps us redefine what it means to be successful. Because especially when we're asking young people, who, by the way, are thinking in more intersectional ways than ever before, they deserve so much credit. when we ask them to share these pieces and then these bills still pass and the bad things still happen, what does that say about the importance of their story if we're not holding them more fully outside of those moments? So I just want to offer that, to follow Equality Florida's lead and so many other organizations that center those whole people, so that again, when the losses happen, we stay in the game because we have a community to come home to and one that's worth fighting for and isn't going anywhere. So thank you.
I want to talk for a second about the secular community and trans issues. This is an important conversation for us to have, because what we've seen in recent months and years, and we have to be honest about this, is that some of the guys whose books I grew up reading, who I saw as heroes, who brought me to secular, are now speaking in some of the most dehumanizing and demagogish ways about trans people. And I hear this from AHA members. They ask, why is AHA talking about trans rights? How is that a humanist issue? I say, first of all, here's your membership feedback. And, you know, yeah, this is an issue we're talking about. I'm going to tell you why. Number one, yes, this is a humanist issue, and it always has been. The right of people to self-determine, the right in a world where we cannot control everything to control our bodies and our identities and how we show up, is the ultimate humanist value. This goes back all the way to John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill talking about the enforced tyranny of social custom and the need for experiments in living if we are to become a truly free society. The idea of individual autonomy over your body, your identity, yourself, rather than believing that your body is made for a purpose that is not your own, is a core humanist value. And you want to know the other reason why secular organizations like AHA and AA, the ones that are growing, are pro-trans rights emphatically? It's because we can read a fucking graph. And the number one reason that young people are leaving religion, the number one reason, is because of disagreements with the theology of conservative religion about LGBTQ issues. So to give an analogy, we've got these young people who come to us and they say, I've been walking across the desert to find you. I have been through hell, I am thirsty, and we are about to hand them an ice cold Coke. We are gonna shoot ourselves in the foot if we let Richard Dawkins come over and piss in that Coke.
Thanks, Fish.
You got this.
Yeah, right. Thanks. No, and you know, yes, humanist values. Obviously, we're American atheists, and we lead with our humanist values. But we've been having this conversation for years in the atheist movement as well about why are we engaging on these issues. And you know, you're just atheists. You don't believe in God. That's the only thing that should matter, and you should care about 10 Commandments and you know, religious displays and the holidays and things like that. And we've done a lot of work talking to our communities, you all among them, and so you've probably heard me or Allison or Jeff or one of us talk about this before, right? That we see all of those things as separation of religion and government issues. Because any time the motivation is to push somebody else's beliefs on people, then we should be there in that fight. And so for the trans issue in particular, we've often been on the forefront of working on these issues in the state level and also at the national level. And we do get pushback. We do get emails. Every time we send out a fucking weekly email that talks about trans issues, we get at least 10 emails back of, why are you engaging on this? And same thing, we just unsubscribe them. We're like, thank you, goodbye. But every single time, without fail and without question, and every single time the response is the same. We need to protect ourselves, and we need to protect other marginalized people. And we need to work together on that. And the other thing is that, you know, we did this survey in 2018, where we put out a survey, probably some of you took it, right? The US Secular Survey. We expected to get 5,000 responses. Turns out atheists really love to talk about themselves. And so we got 34,000 in a week, and we had to shut it down, right? And we asked, what do you want our priorities to be as a secular movement because all of our partners put it out to all of their members, and we spread it as far and wide as we could. It was self-selecting, but you know, pretty good data for 34,000 people. And they said that they wanted us to engage on LGBTQ equality issues. They wanted us to engage on public secular schools. They wanted us to engage on reproductive rights. These are the things that they want. Y'all told us what you wanted us to work on, and we listened. And that's been actually one of my best arguments against these assholes that come out of the woodwork, is we asked, what should we work on as an atheist in the humanist community? And y'all told us this is what we should do. So we're doing it.
All the responses have been so strong, I forgot the original question. What do you want me to say? 'Cause I'll...
The trans issue.
Oh, why we have to fight it? Or, yeah. Well, you know, here's the thing. And I've had this conversation with corporate folks who are dismantling their DEI. It's like virtue untested is not virtue, it's marketing. This is the moment, because it sits at this space of contestation, that if you don't stand up right now on this value, you don't have it. And I will say that within Equality Florida, we have lost donors, mostly white, cis, gay men, whose internalized oppression expresses itself by believing they can buy themselves some proximity to power by jettisoning the most vulnerable in our community. And we see that. We without a doubt, and we have been crystal clear as an organization. We will not bend, bow, or hedge on this fight. This is our fight, fundamentally. The world is so much safer for all of us if it is safe for a 15-year-old trans girl in school in Florida. It's just the fact. The other thing that I want to really draw everybody's attention to is that there's a reason that it is almost all about trans women. We cannot fight this without addressing the Gordian knot of both the cruel hatred of women in this society and the fundamental flaw of racial discrimination in this society. We see time and time again that the moment anti-trans legislation passes, it is black girls who have always had to fight to be recognized as female, regardless of whether they are cisgender or trans, who catch the most hell. And you have immediately the weaponization all across the country of white parents saying, oh, that black girl who beat my kid is a man. You know, Michelle Obama has to endure that. Serena Williams. There is not a black athlete that has not had to endure this idea. And there's a great book by Michael Waters who talks about how it was Nazi doctors that introduced the very first gender testing of female athletes in the famous Berlin Olympics during the war. Men are not tested, and it's not all, it's track and field, and there's a real specific reason for that, but there is no threshold of trying to separate trans women and cis women that does not also sweep away cisgender women, you know, and there is no way to create that divide without reinforcing. There was a woman who came, we had a Drag is Not a Crime event, and the oldest participant, we interviewed people before, they went through a drag transformation. There's certain circumstances that I will show you my drag transformation, usually involving alcohol, but we interviewed people, and we thought most people, because we put it out there as, are there cis women who would be willing to dress in high drag to risk arrest? And we were overwhelmed with responses. And we thought, oh, that's interesting, and like 2 weeks later, they were ready to burn our buildings to the ground if we didn't do this thing. So this woman who has been through a whole lot of fights, I asked her, I said, why, a lot of people think that your generation just can't wrap your head around this. And she's like, that's bullshit. I will tell you this. When they start trying to reduce women to to a biological function, it is because they intend to control our biological function. This is a conversation about breeding, and this is a conversation about reducing women to breeders. And that's why I'm here, and that's why, with my last breath, I'm going to stand up when they come after the transgender community. We have to not just be intellectually understanding that this is wrong, we have to have a fire in our belly to push these people back.
Thank you so much.
Just want to make one more just small point about sports and schools and transgender folks. Sports in schools and athletic things in schools shouldn't be simply just to teach our kids to win. And I think that gets lost, right? Like, sports in schools and athletics in schools should be teaching them teamwork. It should be teaching them self-discipline. It should be teaching them all of these things that don't have anything to do with winning. And so we're also disservicing our students, I think, by just reducing it to, you're gonna win or lose, and that's all that matters. And I think that gets lost in the conversation sometimes, that maybe we should be emphasizing that more. All of the other things that folks learn in sports are very important, and it doesn't matter if you're transgender or not, or if you win or lose to get those things, so.
Good point, good point. One more topic, and then we're going to have a little bit of time for questions, because I know there's got to be questions out there for this amazing panel who's up here. So I wanted to touch a little bit on DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEBI, belonging and inclusion, or whatever. I'm so proud to be the CEO and president of the Pride Chamber of Greater Orlando. And our mission and vision is equality through economics. We ensure that we are advocating always for a safe space so that our business community feels safe and seen, whether they're a small entrepreneur or they work for a major corporation. Along those lines, DEI is one of the foundational building blocks in reference to creating that environment. We recently held a summit, and we had an amazing turnout of all of Orlando's major corporations who came out to speak that they were holding firm in reference to their DEI initiatives. Recently in a study, it was shown that, 87% of corporations are holding firm, sometimes I doubt that number, in reference to their DEI initiatives. But I'd like to ask the group the importance of DEI. Is it a real thing? Is it something that can be part of our advocacy pillar as we move forward? Cheyenne, can we start there? Or we can skip around.
Yeah. I'll speak specifically to the niche that I come from within reproductive freedom. You know, the more I work around bodily autonomy and the attacks on it, the more I can recognize that having bodily autonomy is a threat to things like capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy. And if it wasn't so powerful, they wouldn't work to dismantle it, right? And so that's the first thought that comes to mind for me, is just that if it is under such attack, in the same ways that they rewrite the rules in the places that we find power, whether that's through local governments or through citizen-led amendments, if they're targeting it for its power, that means we recognize that that's exactly what it is. That's what's founded in it. So I'll leave it there, but I might circle back.
The opposite of diversity, equity, and inclusion is legacy admissions, which is how Donald Trump and all his kids got into college. And it's important that we use the words diversity, equity, and inclusion rather than DEI. They've decided to construct a whole series of, they've turned DEI into a specter. When we say those words, Americans still believe in diversity. They believe in living and working among people who don't look like you. They believe in inclusion. People still believe that everyone ought to be treated fairly. They believe, frankly, I wish we would use fairness more rather than equity, because I think fairness is a word that people understand and doesn't need to be defined for them, but people believe in fairness. And conservatives have done a masterful job of rebranding DEI as the opposite of merit. And as humanists, I think we believe in meritocracy, right? We believe that people should have opportunities to rise and fall on the basis of their hard work and talent. And we believe that we have never had a meritocracy in America. We have never, ever, ever had a society where people have an equal shot to succeed regardless of where and how they were and whom they were born to. That's what DEI is seeking to correct. It's the goal of diversity, equity, and inclusion is to create a world where everyone belongs and everyone has an equal chance to thrive. The people who are pushing this meritocratic anti-DEI framing are full of it, and we know it because, again, they will push out affirmative action without touching legacy admissions and athletic admissions, which is what admits 40% of white students at Harvard every year. So the best thing we can do is commit to these values and not just talk about the fact that they matter. Right? We're humanists, and if we're humanists, we believe that you don't treat truth as self-evident, you back it up with logic and reason. So we have to talk about not just the fact that they can't take DEI away from us, but what we lose when they do that and why it matters.
Yeah, I mean, we should be very clear. DEI, remember Lee Atwater and how he said, we can't use the N-word, so we got to find, these other ways, busing, welfare queen. DEI and CRT are just a retread of that same strategy. It's intended to make you, it's what they say when they can't drop the N-bomb. And we have to call it out. And I think to the degree that our wallets are one way that we vote, and our willingness to organize as consumers to apply pressure is a long and effective strategy when deployed with some wisdom. Saying we're boycotting 80 companies is one thing. Nobody going to Publix for one day, Labor Day or whatever their biggest day is, that sends shockwaves through. And if you haven't been following, Publix recently said they denied somebody's request for a sheet cake that had the Canadian flag saying "Welcome Snowbirds," and they attached a note saying that the American flag was the only flag they'd put on cakes. So I'm saying this to say, I don't, we shop local because you can apply pressure locally, and wherever you spend your money, they should hear from you, not just at the cash register, but in the corporate office, and part of what they're capitulating to and getting huge pushback, we're seeing some of them walk back their abandonment of DEI, has come because the far right does a much better job of amplifying and focusing online influencers to have that kind of power, but they do not have the actual numbers. And we have to use our power as consumers as well as voters, and we have to get people to think about where are you spending your money. I have a friend, if we go to a restaurant, she'll ask at the front, do you have a non-discrimination policy and what does it include? And the number of times we've walked away because they couldn't answer the question, but we need to be that real about it.
All righty, I've been told we have 10 more minutes, so we're going to try to take a few questions before we get the hook. We'll start here.
Thank you for the panel. My question is, how do you deal with politicians who may have historically supported equality, suddenly decide to backtrack on their support for political gain?
You primary them.
Anybody else want to take a shot? Kind of says it all. Okay. You primary their butts. Over here, yes, sir.
I spend a considerable amount of time engaging with people online that disagree with me politically and on my non-belief and everything. I'm wondering what the panel's best advice is for how to engage with someone that seems to not care about the truth, that they are needlessly or helplessly dependent upon the propaganda that's being spread online and maybe in person. I'm just wondering what y'all's best advice is for effectively engaging in those conversations.
So I think it depends on if they're arguing in good faith. And I think a lot of them aren't. And so in a lot of cases, my answer is don't, right? Because you're not going to change their minds. Now, if you're talking about, I'm leaving here and I'm going to Miami on the Bright Line, I'm going to go stay with my stepfather and my stepbrother who are Trumpers for 3 days. Can I have conversations with them while I'm there? Absolutely. Will I change their mind about something? Maybe. Maybe small things. But you have to engage in the things that are important to them, right? And you can't just argue about things they don't care about. You're not going to change anybody's mind. So a good example of that is I've already had a conversation with them to remind them to pick me up at the train station. And what came up was, man, they're really finding a lot of fraud in the government. So excited about that. My husband works for the DOD. My stepdaughter works for the DOD. Her boyfriend works for the DOD, right? So I had a conversation with them about, do you know what probationary employees are? Do you know what that means? No. People that were hired 2 years ago, right? No. That means anybody who took a new promotion that have been for the government for 20 years. They don't know that. So I changed their mind on that, like, one tiny thing. Because they care about me, they care about my family, they care about my welfare. I can't change their mind on all of it. But I can have those in-person conversations with the folks who are still in your sphere about what is probationary status of employees in the government, right? So I'm sorry, my advice is don't in a lot of cases, though, especially online. So.
Thank you for the, go ahead.
I'll just respond quickly to say there are 3 resources I encourage everybody: leavingmaga.org, Stephen Hassan's book on cults, and then the third one is The Quiet Damage. And I think if you begin by saying, I want to change their mind, you've already lost. If you begin by saying, I want to understand where you're coming from, they will lower their defenses and be open to, and you can see people move. But I would also say, how are there places offline where you can engage with people who you uniquely have a relationship with? Because just like driving, different parts of our personality can emerge. Being online has the same kind of effect. So, say, hey, can we grab coffee? Because you seem very smart and interesting, and I feel like I really want to understand where you're coming from, and see where it goes.
I know Equality Florida has a lot of resources and teaches a lot of tactics and little things, and I'm wondering if you could share any of those with us today. And I'd also like to ask you guys if you guys have any more reading recommendations.
Yes, I do have reading recommendations. One of the things, before I was an activist, I was a journalist, and these last few years have drawn me back into my journalism bag. And so I have a website, a Substack called Wide Awake America, and by next week I'll have a reading list. That's come because so many of these conversations, people want more resources. Mobs for Liberty, to me, is the perfect way for us to think about how important local organizing is, how important showing up is. If you live in the state of Florida and you have a kid in school, there's more than a 50% chance that at least one person in that school has been trained by Equality Florida staff, whether it's a principal, a superintendent, a teacher, a bus driver, the lunchroom staff. We have trained tens of thousands of people on the premise that one person can make the difference in an LGBTQ student's life. And so what we realized with Moms for Liberty was that they were a political operation and that they did not even have kids in the school. They don't even go here, right? They were homeschoolers, they were Christian, right-wing, school parents. And so we started Parenting with Pride, and we said the one thing we will never do is force a parent to get help. If they want help from us, we won't force them to be political. We don't care what your political affiliation is. If your kid is in stress and you need us, we'll be there. We'll open the door, but at this time you have to remember, Moms for Liberty, their goons were the Proud Boys, masked up and armed, forming gauntlets in front of school boards, calling kids and their parents pedophiles as they walked into the chamber. They had billboards on those vans where they can put billboards, calling the most progressive, inclusive school board members groomers, circling the block. And we didn't know whether parents would actually be willing to go to those school board meetings, because most of them had never, ever been political before, but their kids were coming home saying, the books are gone from our classroom. Our favorite teacher has left. They're making us take down the everyone is welcome posters. All of this was happening. And we would help those families because we had deep relationships with schools, and usually it was a misunderstanding. And not only were they willing to go, once we told them how dangerous it would be, they were eager to go. Even the ones that said, I'll go, but I'm not going to speak, we'd be watching, and it's like, Michael's going to the microphone. And it's because he's sitting there listening to them talk about his kid. Use this ugly, hateful rhetoric to talk about his child. When the real shows up, the fake gets exposed real quick. And in Pinellas, for example, Moms for Liberty told a conservative school board member, we're not coming anymore because Equality Florida calls us liars. You are. But it's really because real parents began to outnumber them, sometimes as much as 5 to 1. And even in places, even in places where Moms for Liberty had strongholds, Sarasota, we blocked them from their agenda. It helped that they were in the middle of a sex scandal, but we blocked them from their agenda. And in this last election, we defeated, like 78% of our candidates beat Moms for Liberty candidates. Even on the night that Trump won Florida, we defeated Moms for Liberty candidates. And there were candidates who begged Moms for Liberty and DeSantis not to endorse them. So we have made it radioactive, but we have to apply that pressure. And that happens when you show up at your school board meeting in your community as a voter, not because a national group or even as a state, me going to testify in Leon County doesn't do what a Leon dad showing up for that school board meeting does. So that's what I would say to anyone who wants to organize, make it hyper local. The people who they will bump into at restaurants and at the hardware store have a greater impact on what they are willing to do and not willing to do when they have to look you in the eye.
Thank you, Nadine, so much. So we have 5 more minutes. We still have time for a few questions. Go ahead.
Okay, this one is for everyone, but specifically Fish and Sam. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I kind of am. So, Fish, I loved what you said about pissing in the Coke. So if someone's crossing the desert and finding AHA, or say someone is crossing the desert and they find the Secular Coalition for America, and they find out that there's one member organization that is trying to piss in the Coke, what does the SCA do about that pisser?
We did what we did. Y'all heard about that. Ultimately, I think we do have to draw a distinction between people who should know better, who are deluding other people, and people who are being caught up in the delusion, right? Ultimately, there is, I believe, and the AHA believes, that trans women are women. And I also know that's not a self-evident statement to a lot of America. We have to talk that through and justify why we believe that. We need to talk about the biological basis for it. We need to talk about the basis in our humanist philosophy, again, for that kind of self-determination. And so I think that there are a lot of folks in the movement who I'm happy to have the conversation with. But we have to be clear the difference between asking questions, because this is something that you are still coming to understand, and active demagoguery against one of the most violently oppressed groups of people in this country. I can't control what other organizations do. I can barely control what the AHA does. Humanists are not resistant to central methods of control. But I think the best we can do is make the affirmative case for why, because of our values and for our own survival, the secular movement needs to embrace all forms of liberation, and then bring people onto our side rather than just excluding people who don't agree.
I think the other piece of that, knowing where this question is coming from, is that we need to state our values. And I'm sure that some of you might have seen that a lot of the secular organizations, including AHA and others, signed on to a letter that was affirming our commitment to LGBTQ and trans rights specifically. And those organizations signed on to that, and then we pushed it out also to local organizations and to individuals, and we got a lot of signatures on it. So I think that wherever we can, we have to positively affirm our support, and we have to do better as a coalition. We really do. We have to make sure that we are promoting the values that our members want us to see, and that we are taking strong positions on these things. And the secular movement is messy. I think we all know that. It just is. It always has been. Again, to your point, we don't have a centralized locus of control, right? My job is to herd cats. That's literally my job. It's just to try to make all of us move in the same direction, and we're not going to. And that's fine, because again, we at American Atheists, we all kind of center on our non-belief. And we have, as I've said, told people who don't have the same values as us, fine, go start your own group, Atheists for Liberty, right? Go do that. Go do it somewhere else. You don't need to be in our space. And I think we just have to continue to hold that line, frankly.
Sadly, I've been told that we are out of time, but the panel will be available we'll be over here near this wall, and we'll be fielding any further questions. Please join me in, well, first of all, thank you so much for your engagement and the energy in the room. Thank our panelists for a great panel, and thank you so much for having us today. Thank you.